what a terrific, terrific event. And it's a pretty hard act to follow, that one from Femi. Unfortunately, your programs does still say Dave Palmer. Unfortunately, he couldn't be here today. But yes, as you can see, I am not Dave Palmer. But I work very closely with him and with an R&D team, which I think is just second to none. It's such a privilege working at Darktrace. And yes, I have a bit of a different background. I've joined a cybersecurity company because one of the things that I'm really interested about is always looking at how we can use technology really to enable business growth, right? Get out of the way of allowing people to do their jobs in the most safe and in the most effective way possible. And of course, you know, as we're encouraging users to be on social platforms, to encourage discussions and dialogues and meetups, it becomes increasingly difficult to be doing that in a safe environment. So there's always this natural tension between those two priorities of any given business. And so when we were looking at the challenge with cybersecurity, what Darktrace did, for those of you who don't know the company, just by way of a bit of an introduction here, is flip the problem around and think, right, rather than trying to define what's something that shouldn't happen, or what bad is, or try to come up with all of the possible ways in which our workers can interact or destinations that they can communicate with, what if instead of telling a computer what good and bad is, what if we allowed a machine to figure out what normal is, and then by that figure out when something abnormal starts happening, and then take action? That was basically the funding principle behind the enterprise immune system. Essentially, it models the same as the human immune system, right? None of our two immune systems are the same. Our immune systems are adaptive to threats that might get through our outer protective layer and get inside. And once things start happening that maybe look a little bit weird or wonky, our immune systems step in to fight that anomaly. And that's exactly what we have been able to teach in a computer, machine learning and AI environment, is to achieve this. Now, one of the things that also Darktrace was able to do in terms of bringing this technology out to the market was then making it work in the real world, which is, of course, the biggest challenge. And so for it to work in the real world, some principles of any machine learning that we should be considering are the following. Oops, sorry. We wanted to be able to understand what we've dropped it into and then allow the machine to evolve its understanding of what normal is. Because, of course, businesses grow, we have new users, we have new devices, so it's really important that that learning continues over time. As threats evolve and attack surfaces expand, we want to be able to detect all types of attacks, not just certain types, but anything that could be deemed anomalous or maybe a little bit unusual. So detects all threat types absolutely must be there. Sorry, we had a little demo here showing this in action, but we'll see some more of them later. It doesn't matter whether or not your infrastructure is on-premise, if your users are using cloud, if you have remote workers who are logging into your corporate systems for the train. We need to be able to understand all of those interactions, be them on an OT shop floor or in manufacturing. I think I've mentioned the cloud. Whatever devices you have, it doesn't matter. The only way for you to fully understand the big picture is for you to see the whole picture. So 100% visibility is absolutely crucial. And of course, I said growth, but also scalability. We want our machines to be able to scale out in order to cover all of the users and all types of devices. Oops. Lastly, and this is the big one here, we want it to be able to fight back. And when I say fight back, is in the same way as the immune system can understand when something is unusual and take proportionate action or reaction to that one thing, it is absolutely key that any AI-driven defense mechanism that is engaging in some kind of autonomous response takes that same philosophy and applies it. Quick side as to how do we do this then? Well, mentioned the visibility. And essentially what we look at is to take a tap on the network directly and understand all of that beautiful network traffic in between devices, in between users, the frequency. And we're looking at over 350 parameters of data, and we're modeling then that data across all of those feature sets. And we're then applying unsupervised machine learning to this so that the computing power in the machine learning is doing this on its own. There is no training data set for what a normal enterprise is. You might all think that you represent one. And I'm sure that the person sitting next to you has a very different situation happening within their enterprise. And this was one of the big challenges with machine learning, is we didn't want to predetermine anything. We wanted it to have the ability to say, this is what I'm exposed to, and this is what it looks like. Let's start then understanding what those clusters are. One of the things that I also find fascinating is the idea of like those clusters of users. So we were once in a company who had, as most of them, by the way, some kind of vulnerability before Darktrace gets installed. And then the next question is, well, if it's already compromised, how's that not what you learn to be normal? And what we're looking at is, because we're looking at so many different parameters and features, we're also clustering users and devices to see, okay, well, are you doing things, and is your pattern of life similar to other people who are a bit more like you? So do we have a marketing group on one side where somebody is accessing R&D documents? Well, that might be me because I work with Dave and I work with marketing. But that might be a little bit unusual if my evil twin sister who comes along one day, impersonates me, and starts behaving differently. Well, then that is a different type of unusual. So we're also able to detect those kind of things because we're doing it also at scale. Now, what we have here is a demo of a situation where we had a campus laptop be infected, probably off campus. Some of you might have actually seen this on the booth. I'm afraid we can't quite get a lot of resolution here to read all of the parameters, but let me explain. Here in the middle, we have this computer, which was the one that was infected, and it then manages to negotiate some guessing some admin passwords. And what it's going to start doing as those thin lines connect to more devices and more servers, it starts hoarding a whole bunch of data onto that computer. Now, this is a very, very simple threat, which is easily circumvented by powering down the computer, doing some resets to the proper security parameters, and shutting down that connection to that infection. We also have a thin line going out to the world. No, we don't. That's in the next one. But as these lines increase, and we have all of these different documents, you can see those lines in red, what these are contract documentation, pricing strategy, valuable IP, which we don't want to be leaving the corporate grounds. So this attack is one which is very easily solved once we found it, just a case of rebooting the computer, and the job's done. As we're growing then in our deployments, Darktrace through the years has seen all sorts of attacks. And I'm sure that every single security vendor and all of you guys also have seen an increase. It does beg the question whether or not we're just getting better at detecting attacks or whether there are legitimately more attacks. But for our boards, it doesn't really matter. They don't really care, as long as we're actually focusing on stopping the bad stuff from happening. And as we're going into this, what I see, and I was actually with a SOC team a couple of weeks ago where we had, they told me the story where they had stopped for somebody's birthday. They sang happy birthday, had a slice of cake, and lo and behold, just in that split, 5 minutes, 15 minutes of cake eating, they were hit with a devastating ransomware attack. Of course, the joke being that now birthdays are canceled for the entire SOC team. Now, all joking aside, we cannot reasonably expect 24 hours all the time. We need to find a better solution than that because, of course, just even if we were able to hire against the skills shortage crisis that we're having and putting more people on this mentality of firefighting, we get ourselves into that trap where we've got more people who are doing more firefighting, who are doing less preventative security, which leads us to more incidents that now they're firefighting and we have to hire more people again. And it just doesn't work. There needs to be a better way. Now, there are a couple of ways in which we can lead that automation revolution. One of them is through orchestration and essentially machine speeding playbooks. And this is a really great place to start. Essentially, what we're looking at is finding ways to streamline and optimize the steps that you would take given certain things. So, of course, reduction in speed response time is always a good idea, but this will only go so far. Because by automating an orchestration, we're only allowing the computer to take the actions that had been preset. And therefore, it won't be able to deviate. It can't innovate. It can't come up with something different. And so for novel attacks, we then fall back into that same idea of having predefined a solution or a problem. I think it would be much better if we therefore allowed the computer to be able to, since it's able to learn and adapt its understanding of that learning, to take action autonomously. And this is where cyber AI response really comes into play. So let's just think about a couple of things here. I spoke about the pattern of life and how that is constructed over time, maybe a couple of weeks, understanding all of those users. And what we can then do is basically think of it as resisting any unexpected changes and resisting the normal operations from deviating. So if we have something that's happening that is odd or unusual, we want to stop just that one thing, not the entire computer. Because if we then go and quarantine the entire computer, and God help us, it's the CFO's computer, the CEO's computer, and actually they were in the middle of really important contract negotiation over email, well, we've actually managed to take a very sort of blunt approach rather than just stopping that one maybe ransomware attack that was happening in the background. So let's just resist the unexpected changes and successfully act and continue to act until then we restore the normal operations of that device or of that user. And we really want to be doing this on the broadest possible understanding of what that normalcy looks like. And I spoke about loads of devices. We also have customers who have few users, fewer devices, but lots of data, for example. So we're able to just understand all of that and put it back into context. And that's important here because these decisions made in context are so valuable because that's where we need a little bit of help as humans because we need to be able to find those subtle deviations, those very small movements of an attacker that are at the earliest stages before they become a crisis. So we want to get out of fighting those crises. So let's keep it ultra focused. If we need to interrupt a connection, if we need to interrupt an attack 1,000 times over, we can do that. We can be very, very specific in the type of action or reaction that the immune system is taking to then allow the computer or the worker to continue their normal day-to-day jobs. It literally buys time for the security team to now be able to investigate, and that's what we do best. Understand what actually has happened and come up with a decision. But more importantly, it is also able to adapt. So if an attacker adapts its attack style, an immune system is now able to respond to that new attack style and come up with a different response. So maybe they were trying one thing over and over and over again, slight deviation from that. We don't need to be setting the if-then configurations for all of those different types of combinations. We've seen it fail before, and it will probably fail again. So what we want to do is really reinforce, as I said, that normal user operation and keep it super, super focused. Let's see it in action. So here what we have is a ransomware attack. This is we're all familiar with it. Here we have actually the computer, and you can see those light blue lines going out. Very quick negotiation of communications between it and the server. And over here we have on the logs basically just showing the step-by-step of what's happened, the files that are encrypted and so on. And this is, it's a pretty simple, straightforward use case that you can also help evangelize with. The speed with which some of these attacks can then cause devastating and lasting impact to our businesses has been proven time and time again, and it will probably then accelerate in the future. So you have machine speed attacks. Let's get a machine speed response, and we can stop this before it has a chance to spread to other users. But then let's take a step back and think, okay, well, my company has a lot of users, and phishing attacks that lead to ransomware, phishing emails that lead to ransomware attacks are nothing new. And unlikely this was the only compromised device. So let's take a big picture look at the company as a whole And what we can do is, now that we've identified patient 0, is scale this back a little bit and look across our company if there's anyone else that has also been targeted. And a few months ago, this was the release with Antigena email, where we're now able to not only interrupt the network connections, but also understand the contextual 100% view and visibility of all those interactions, including emails. So in this clip here, what we're going to see is a similar attack, actually it's the same one, where Antigena email is actually looking back through those logs, and we're identifying the source of the compromise as being this malicious email that had managed to come in. And we're actually seeing that this particular user is one of multiple recipients of that email. So suddenly what we're able to do now is to prevent those other users clicking on those attacks, on those links, and prevent further computers being affected. So now we have one patient rather than repeating the same interruption that we did on that first device 6 times over. And so the speed with which we're intervening is very dramatic and only really achievable when we manage to get then the help of an AI engine who can fully understand that pattern of life. Now, wrapping up here, just in terms of time, how do we actually go about deploying this in a real-world scenario? Well, if you think about wanting to deploy something like this, here are a couple of tips that maybe you might want to consider. Try it directly in a messy, real-world environment. Don't try it in the lab. It'll be very sterile. It'll be very limited. Try it in maybe a non-business critical infrastructure, or maybe in something where you have a lot of volume and a lot of traffic. And basically, try it also somewhere where you don't need to spend too much time bringing about change or trying to convince people, or too much time on the setup. It'll set itself up. Maybe consider picking from a menu of options what kind of reactions you're comfortable with allowing the system to take, so that you're not overwhelmed, or you're not thinking, okay, I need to hand over the keys to this AI engine and not really know what's going on. We also have ways in which you and your teams and your superiors can build confidence in the responses as it recommends a response, as it would then say, hey, will you allow me to do this? And you confirm that response. And of course, all of this can be then followed up by either through your SOC team or through a mobile app. Right. With that, I'm going to leave it, and I will be very happy to have any conversations or follow up with you if you want. I'll be back in the area during the coffee break. Thank you so much for your time and for your attention, and see you later. Do you have time for questions?
Sorry?
Do you have time for questions?
No, we haven't time.
Sorry about that.
Thank you. So do visit the stand in the exhibition hall and talk to Marianne separately. Moving on to our very special